That night is burned into my memory, clearer than yesterday. With our parents gone, it was just me and my twin sister, Emma, alone in the house. But what she did next shattered the thin line between ordinary and unforgettable. The night began like any other, settling into an unspoken rhythm when you've shared your entire life with someone. Our parents had vanished into the evening, leaving the house unusually quiet, with only the occasional hum of the refrigerator or the creak of old wood beneath our feet breaking the silence. This wasn't the first time Emma and I had been left to our own devices. We had grown accustomed to it, turning these nights into our own little world where time seemed to stretch as if daring us to fill it. I was a couple of minutes older than Emma, and though our genders were different, we were still look-alike twins. I was on the couch, idly scrolling through my phone, but my attention wasn't on the screen. Across from me, Emma was stretched out in her usual spot, one arm draped over the backrest, her eyes flickering between the TV and some private thought. Her presence was as familiar to me as breathing, yet tonight, something about her felt different. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, listening. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder in the silence, each creak of the floorboards like a drumbeat under my skin. "Watch a movie?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice slicing through the thick quiet. She turned her head toward me, and for a moment, her dark eyes caught mine in a way that made me forget to answer. I shrugged, playing it cool. "Whatever you want." "Helpful," she said, smirking. She grabbed the remote, flipping through options with deliberate slowness meant to test my patience. I couldn't help but smile at her theatrics. "If you're going to take that long, I'm choosing a rom-com." "Over my dead body," she shot back, laughing. It was easy with Emma, our banter, the way we moved through each other's lives like two sides of the same coin. But even as the laughter filled the room, there was an undercurrent of something else, subtle but undeniable, a tension building like a storm on the horizon. Eventually, she landed on a movie we'd both seen dozens of times, the kind you don't need to pay attention to because the dialogue is etched into your memory. We settled into the quiet comfort of it, the glow of the screen casting soft shadows against the walls, but my focus wasn't on the movie. My mind was elsewhere, drawn to her in a way that felt both familiar and unsettling. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught her glancing at me. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it sent a ripple of awareness through me. Emma was always bold, the one who spoke her mind without hesitation, but tonight, there was a hesitation in her that mirrored my own. It was in the way she shifted her weight or how her hand moved absent-mindedly along the edge of the couch as if she were testing the air between us. "What?" I asked finally, unable to take the silence anymore. She shook her head, her smile faint but her eyes held secrets. "Nothing," she said, too quickly. "Liar." "Okay, maybe something," she admitted, leaning forward, her elbows resting on her knees. The light from the screen played across her face, highlighting the sharp angles that mirrored my own. "You ever think about how weird it is being twins?" "I mean, weird how?" "Like people assume we're the same, right? Of course, I'm a boy, and you're a girl, but same face, same thoughts, same everything. But we're not really." I nodded, her words stirring something deep within me. Emma and I had always been seen as a unit, interchangeable in most people's eyes, but she was right. We weren't the same. Emma was the fearless one, the one who charged headfirst into life while I hung back, content to observe. Yet, in moments like this, when her guard was down, I saw parts of her that felt closer to my own, a quiet vulnerability she rarely let anyone else see. My thoughts tangled, each one pulling me in a different direction. Was this curiosity, fear, or something deeper? Her eyes locked onto mine, daring me to answer questions I didn't dare ask myself. "I guess it's just easier for people to lump us together," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "It's not like we've ever really shown them otherwise." Her gaze lingered on me, and I felt the weight of it in the space between us. "Maybe we should." It was such a simple statement, but the way she said it made my heart skip. Before I could respond, she leaned back again, her casual posture betraying none of the tension I felt coiling in the air. I turned back to the screen, pretending to watch, but my mind was racing, caught between the familiarity of the moment and the unfamiliar pull that seemed to draw us closer. The minutes stretched on, and the silence between us grew heavier, loaded with unspoken words. I didn't know what to say, didn't even know if there was anything to say, but Emma, as always, found a way to break through. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice softer now, almost tentative. "What's going on in that overthinking head of yours?" "Nothing," I lied, because the truth was tangled in a web of emotions I wasn't ready to unravel. "Just tired." She didn't press, but her eyes searched mine as if she could see the thoughts I was trying to bury. For a moment, I thought she might call me out on it, but instead, she shifted closer, her knee brushing against mine in a way that felt deliberate. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I struggled to keep my composure. "Sure it's nothing," she asked, her tone lighter now, teasing, but there was an edge to it, a challenge that made my pulse quicken. I forced a smile, shrugging. "Yeah, sure." The tension between us was almost palpable now, a silent current that neither of us seemed willing to name, but it was there, undeniable in the way her gaze lingered or how the air between us seemed charged with something neither of us could ignore. As the night wore on, the distance between us seemed to shrink. Emma's easy laughter filled the room, pulling me back into the comfort of the moment, but beneath it all, that unspoken tension remained, waiting. In the quiet, I realized something: this wasn't just another night. Something was shifting between us, and there was no going back. Emma had always been the louder one, the one who could fill any silence with a jest or a story, but tonight her usual bravado was muted, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. I felt it every time our knees brushed or when her gaze lingered just a moment too long. It wasn't the kind of tension that felt uncomfortable, it was something else, something that sent a thrill through me I didn't want to admit. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if we weren't twins?" she asked suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. I blinked at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, leaning back against the couch. "I don't know, just if we weren't, maybe things would feel different." It was such a strange thing to say, yet it hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. I wanted to ask what she meant but hesitated, sensing an uncertainty in her tone as if she wasn't sure of the answer herself. "I guess it's hard to imagine," I said finally. "We've always been us." "Yeah," she murmured, her eyes flicking to mine for a brief second before darting away. "Always." The word carried a weight I couldn't quite unpack, but before I could dwell on it, she pushed herself off the couch. "You want a drink?" "I'm grabbing one." "Sure," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. I watched her disappear into the kitchen, my thoughts spinning as I tried to make sense of the strange shift between us. Emma had always been my other half, the person who knew me better than anyone, but tonight, it felt like we were standing on the edge of something new, something neither of us could fully grasp. When she came back, she handed me a glass of water, her fingers brushing against mine for just a second too long. She sat closer this time, her thigh pressing against mine as she settled back into the couch. It was such a small thing, but it made my heart race in a way I couldn't ignore. "You ever wonder why we never talk about real stuff?" she asked, her voice low and thoughtful. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Like we're close, right?" "Closer than most people, but there's still stuff we don't talk about." "Everybody has things they don't talk about," I said, though the words felt hollow as they left my mouth. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "But we're not everybody, Alex. We're us." The words struck something deep inside me, and I felt my breath catch. She wasn't wrong, we weren't like most people. We'd always been closer, understood each other in ways no one else could, but there were still things we avoided, things we didn't dare put into words. I guess, I trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. You guess, she repeated, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. That's your answer? I rolled my eyes, trying to deflect. What do you want me to say? Something real, she said simply, her voice softer now. I didn't know how to respond to that. The weight of her gaze was too much, so I turned away, staring at the TV even though I wasn't paying attention to it. Emma didn't press me, but she didn't move away either. The warmth of her leg against mine was a constant reminder of how close she was, how impossible it was to ignore the strange pull between us. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until she broke it again. Do you ever think about us differently? My heart skipped a beat at her words, and I turned to look at her, searching her face for some hint of what she meant. But her expression was unreadable, her eyes locked on mine as if daring me to answer. I don't know what you mean, I said, though my voice wavered slightly. Yeah, you do, she said, her tone quiet but firm. I think you've thought about it, even if you don't want to admit it. The air between us felt electric, charged with something that had been building for years but was only now coming to the surface. I wanted to deny it, to brush off her words and pretend they didn't mean anything, but I couldn't, not when every glance, every touch, every unspoken word between us told a different story. What if I have? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened slightly, then she looked as uncertain as I felt. But her expression softened, and she leaned in just enough that I could feel her breath against my skin. Then maybe I'm not the only one. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt a rush of emotions, fear, excitement, confusion, all tangled together in a way that left me breathless. Emma didn't move, didn't push me, but the intensity of her gaze told me she was waiting, giving me the space to decide. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what this meant, didn't know what it would change, but in that moment, with Emma so close and the weight of her words pressing down on me, I realized I didn't care. As I sat there, the weight of the night still pressing on my chest, I realized some questions don't have answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made them impossible to ignore. Emma didn't move, her eyes stayed locked on mine, unwavering, her expression unreadable yet filled with a depth I couldn't turn away from. Every part of me was urging me to speak, to act, but I was trapped between fear and the undeniable pull towards her. Alex, she said softly, my name slipping from her lips like a secret meant just for me. You can talk to me. You always could. It wasn't just the words but the way she said them, quiet, gentle, devoid of her usual teasing edge. Emma was being raw, vulnerable, and it sent a shiver through me that was both frightening and exhilarating. I know, I murmured, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It's just complicated. Complicated doesn't mean bad, she replied, leaning back slightly though the air between us remained charged. Sometimes it just means it's worth figuring out. The way she looked at me then, steady and unflinching, made my heart race. Her gaze seemed to peer through every defense I'd ever built, and for the first time, I didn't want to hide. I knew something was coming, and I was right. Without realizing it, I'd leaned closer to her, our knees brushing again, but this time with intent. Emma didn't pull away, instead, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching mine for any sign of doubt. What are we doing, Emma? I asked, my voice a hushed whisper. I don't know, she admitted, the corners of her lips twitching into a faint smile. But it doesn't feel wrong, does it? I wanted to deny it, to say we should stop, that this was a line we shouldn't cross, but the truth was there, undeniable. It didn't feel wrong, it felt like the culmination of something that had been building for years, waiting for this moment to be acknowledged. No, I said finally, the word a confession, a surrender. That was all it took. Emma moved first, closing the distance between us until I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin. My heart was pounding, my thoughts a chaotic mix of anticipation and fear, but when her lips met mine, all the noise in my head faded, leaving only the sensation of her. The kiss was tentative at first, as if we were both testing the boundaries of this new territory. Her hand found its way to my jaw, her fingers brushing against my skin in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't think, I couldn't. I just kissed her back, losing myself in the moment. It wasn't awkward or strange, not like I'd feared. It felt natural, like this was where we were always meant to end up. Emma's touch grew bolder, her lips pressing harder against mine as her other hand slipped to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. I let out an involuntary sigh, and she smiled against my lips, her confidence bolstered by my response. When we finally pulled apart, my chest was heaving with shallow breaths, my mind still reeling. Emma didn't move far, her forehead resting lightly against mine as her fingers stayed tangled in my hair. Her eyes searched mine, a hint of uncertainty flickering in their depths. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I nodded, though the reality of what had just happened was only beginning to sink in. "Yeah, I think so." She chuckled softly, her thumb brushing along my jaw. "You think?" "I don't know what to think," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "But I don't regret it." "Good," she said, her smile genuine, broadening into something more heartfelt. "Because I don't either." Her words settled over me, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. This was Emma, my twin, my other half, and yet in this moment, she felt like something more, someone I'd been drawn to without even realizing it. We didn't say much after that. The silence between us was no longer tense, but filled with a quiet understanding. But we both knew this wasn't over, there was something still coming. Emma's arm slipped around my shoulders, pulling me against her as we sank back into the couch. I rested my head against her chest, listening to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and for the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. "Do you think this changes everything?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma tilted her head, her gaze meeting mine with a depth that made my chest tighten. "Does it have to?" I hesitated, her question ricocheting in my mind. "I don't know. Maybe it already has." She nodded slowly, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns along my arm, the touch soothing, a quiet reassurance in the face of the unknown. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," she said after a pause, her voice laced with a tentative hope I hadn't expected. It was such a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of everything we weren't saying aloud. The truth was, I didn't know what this meant for us, didn't know if we could keep this thing, whatever it was, contained within the walls of our home. But Emma's confidence, her quiet certainty, steadied me in a way I couldn't explain. "What happens when someone finds out?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. She frowned, her fingers stilling against my skin. "No one has to know, Alex. This is ours. No one else gets a say in it." Her words stirred something deep inside me, a mix of relief and fear. I wanted to believe her, to trust that we could keep this moment untouched by the outside world, but doubt lingered like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Emma must have sensed my hesitation because she shifted slightly, her hand moving to cup my cheek. "Hey," she said softly, her thumb brushing against my skin. "We don't have to figure it all out right now. One step at a time, okay?" I nodded, her touch grounding me once more. Emma had always been the one to dive in headfirst, unafraid of what lay ahead. I envied that about her, her ability to embrace the unknown without hesitation, and for the first time, I found myself leaning into that part of her, trusting her to guide me through the uncertainty. The sound of the clock ticking in the corner pulled me back to the present, a quiet reminder of the world outside our little bubble. I sat up slightly, glancing toward the window where the night sky stretched endlessly, stars flickering faintly against the darkness. "We should probably head to bed," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "Probably," Emma agreed, though she made no move to let me go. Instead, her hand lingered on my arm, her touch anchoring me to the moment. Reluctantly, we untangled ourselves from the couch, the warmth of her body leaving a faint ache in its absence. The house was eerily quiet as we made our way upstairs, the faint creak of the wooden stairs the only sound to break the stillness. Emma walked just ahead of me, her presence a steady reassurance in the dark. When we reached my bedroom door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Emma stopped just behind me, her closeness sending a shiver down my spine. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I nodded, though the knot in my chest told a different story. "Yeah, I don't want this to end." Her hand found mine, her grip firm yet gentle. "It doesn't have to." The weight of her words settled over me, a quiet promise that eased the tension in my chest. I pushed the door open, stepping inside as Emma followed close behind. The room felt smaller with her there, the air charged with an unspoken energy that made my skin prickle. She didn't ask for permission as she pulled back the covers and settled onto my bed, her movements as natural as if this had always been our routine. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but the sight of her there, calm and unbothered, silenced them all. "Come on," she said, patting the empty space beside her. "It's just me." Her words carried a weight that made my throat tighten. It wasn't just anything, it was her, Emma, my other half, the one person who knew me better than I knew myself, and yet in that moment, she felt like something more, someone I was seeing for the first time. I slipped into bed beside her, the mattress dipping slightly under our combined weight. Emma turned onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow, her gaze meeting mine. The faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp angles that mirrored my own. "You're overthinking again," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Can you blame me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," she admitted, her expression softening. "But you don't have to. Not tonight." Her hand moved to my face, her fingers brushing against my jaw in a touch so gentle it made my chest ache. I didn't flinch or pull away, instead, I let myself lean into her touch, my eyes slipping closed as the weight of the moment washed over me. When her lips met mine again, it wasn't tentative like before, it was deliberate, full of a quiet intensity that stole the breath from my lungs. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as her body pressed against mine, her warmth seeping into me like a second skin. I didn't think about what this meant or what would come next, I couldn't. All I could do was feel, the way her fingers tangled in my hair, the way her breath hitched against my lips, the way her heartbeat matched mine in perfect rhythm. Time blurred, the world outside fading into nothingness as we lost ourselves in each other. Every touch, every whispered breath felt like a revelation, a discovery of something that had always been there but never acknowledged. Eventually, the only thing I can say is that it was overwhelming, even a bit painful in its intensity, and when we finally pulled apart, my chest heaved with shallow breaths, my skin tingling with the remnants of her touch. Emma didn't move far, her forehead resting lightly against mine as her fingers stayed tangled in my hair. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond because, for the first time in my life, I believed her. The morning light filtered through the curtains, spilling soft gold across the room. I stirred, disoriented for a moment before the warmth of Emma's arm around me brought everything rushing back. My chest tightened as I remembered the events of the night before, the weight of it settling over me. Like a fragile secret. Emma was still asleep beside me, her face relaxed in a way I rarely saw, her features so familiar and yet so different in this context, making my heart clench. This was Emma, not just my twin but someone I had seen in every light, every angle, and now someone who was something more. I stayed still, watching her breathe, my mind a storm of emotions I couldn't name. Part of me wanted to slip out of bed, to put some distance between us before the weight of the day set in, but another part, the stronger part, couldn't bear to move. Her presence was a tether, grounding me in a way I didn't understand but craved all the same. As if sensing my thoughts, Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet mine with a softness that made my chest ache. She didn't speak right away, just held my gaze, the quiet between us filled with everything we weren't saying. "Morning," she murmured, her voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of the night before lingering between us, heavy but not unwelcome. Emma's hand moved to my face, her thumb brushing against my cheek in a touch so tender it made my breath catch. "You okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I nodded, though the knot in my chest hadn't loosened. "Yeah, just trying to figure out what this means." Her lips quirked into a small smile. "It means we stopped pretending." The simplicity of her words caught me off guard. "And then what?" Emma's expression softened, her fingers stilling against my skin. "Then we figure it out together." Her certainty, her quiet confidence steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't have all the answers, I wasn't sure I ever would, but Emma's presence, her unwavering belief that this was okay, was enough to quiet the storm in my mind. The day moved slowly, every moment steeped in a newfound awareness. We didn't talk about it, not explicitly. Instead, we moved through the motions of the morning with an unspoken understanding that what had happened wasn't something we needed to dissect, it simply was. It wasn't until the afternoon that the weight of the outside world crept back in. A message from Mom popped up on my phone, a reminder that they'd be home soon. The bubble we'd been living in, the fragile space where time seemed to stand still, would soon burst. "They'll be back in a few hours," I said, my voice breaking the silence. Emma glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "And I don't know," I admitted, the worry creeping into my tone. "What happens now?" She sat down her coffee mug, leaning back with a calm that belied my internal turmoil. "Nothing has to change, Alex. Not unless we want it to." Her words were a balm, yet the reality of our situation loomed. "What if they find out?" "They won't," she said, her confidence unshaken. "This is ours. No one else gets to know." The truth in her words calmed me, though a part of me still ached under the weight of our secret. It wasn't shame, it was more the fear of the unknown, of how we'd navigate this new path with only each other as allies. As the day progressed, the house came alive with the sounds of our parents returning, their laughter, the clatter of luggage, their voices filling the space that had been ours alone. It felt jarring, transitioning from the intimacy of the morning to this bustling normalcy. Emma and I slipped back into our usual roles, the ease of our interactions masking the undercurrent of our new reality. But as the evening wore on, I felt the weight of our secret pressing down on me again. The unspoken, the unacknowledged, felt too large to contain within these four walls. Later that night, after the house had settled into silence once more, I found Emma on the couch, her attention seemingly on the TV, yet her posture betrayed attention. She didn't look up as I approached, but I could see the tightness in her shoulders, the set of her jaw as if she were bracing for something. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice low, cutting through the quiet. "Something like that," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken thoughts. I sat beside her, feeling the distance between us more acutely than before. We didn't speak for a long moment, the silence a heavy thing until Emma turned to me, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the stillness. The question caught me off guard, but my answer was instant. "No." "Do you?" Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "Never." The relief was immediate, easing the tension that had built up all day. Emma shifted closer, her hand finding mine, a simple touch that meant so much. "This doesn't have to be complicated," she said softly, her fingers tightening around mine. "We just take it one step at a time." I nodded, her words grounding me. For the first time, the uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like an adventure we'd face together. As the night deepened, the silence between us became comfortable again. Emma's arm wrapped around me, pulling me close, and I leaned into her, finding solace in her warmth. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: we had each other, and that was enough for now. As I sat there, the weight of the night still pressing on my chest, I realized some questions don't have answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made them impossible to ignore.